welcome to another Design Clips here at W+9. This is Dawn. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing how to use your stamp positioning tool to quickly and easily create perfect repeating patterns. One of the things that I really love about this technique is it's a great basic technique that is a jumping off point for other techniques. With a few minor modifications, you can really stretch this technique. I have several examples to share with you today, but first I'm going to show you how to set up your guide or your jig. I've got a thin piece of copy paper here. You want something transparent because you want to be able to see through it. I've cut it down to 6 by 6 inches square, and now I'm just drawing a line at the center point both vertically and horizontally. This is going to give me 4 quadrants, which is the basis of my repeating pattern. I'm going to create a little floral motif, and then I'm going to repeatedly stamp that little motif in each of my quadrants. And this is going to be really easy with the help of my stamp positioning tool. I'll just have to stamp, turn my cardstock a quarter of a turn, stamp, turn my cardstock, and then stamp. So you'll want to pick one of the 4 quadrants to stamp your little motif in. I like to make mine break the plane. Each of these lines represents the horizontal and vertical plane. I like to make mine overlap one of the planes just a little bit because otherwise I'll have a gap down the center, both vertically and horizontally, and you'll be able to easily detect that repeated pattern. So this will just make it a little more organic. It doesn't matter what color you stamp your motif in right now. It can all be one color. I'm using our Fairy Dust ink, and I'm using our Happy Wishes stamp set. This is a wonderful floral set. Everything looks hand-drawn or hand-painted and sketchy, so it's very forgiving. Nothing has to overlap or be tucked behind. It's just a great free-form floral. So it's perfect for this technique, but you could use any of your images that you already have on hand with this. You could use lined images and then come back in color. You could do critters. This is just going to create an all-over repeating pattern. I like to use a lighter color of ink because I can see my stamping on my project through the copy paper, and the ink is not blocking out what's underneath. And you'll see more of what I'm talking about here in a minute. And the great thing about this is that you can store this with your stamp set. You could stamp a different motif in each of the 4 quadrants and then just choose which one you want to use for each project and use this over and over again. So with our motif complete, it's time to go ahead and start doing our pattern stamping. Okay, so I've got my standard size MISTI here. I've gotten another piece of cardstock. This is our white cardstock, and I've cut it down to 6 by 6 as well. And I'm going to layer my template over top of it. Now this is going to be my guide of where to place all of my stamps when I go in to do my stamping. So for each piece, I'm just going to line up my image over my template, pick that up with my MISTI door, ink it up, and stamp it down. And I'll repeat this for each of my 4 quadrants. So I'll take my cardstock here, I'll turn it a quarter of a turn, ink my stamp up again, and then stamp it down. And I'll repeat this 4 times. Each time I'll turn the cardstock in between and then restamp my image. Once I've got all 4 stamped, I'm going to go ahead and replace my template and line up my next series of stamps. And anything that I'm going to be stamping in the same color, I can go ahead and line those all up and pick them all up at once and save some time and stamp those out all together. So all of these leaves will be stamped in our warm wool ink, and I will have all of the products listed in the description box below as well as on our blog. So if I forget to mention a certain color that I used on the pattern paper and you want to know what it is, be sure to check there for a link to our blog where I will list all of the colors used for each card. So just like before, we're going to ink, stamp, turn, ink, stamp, turn, ink, stamp, turn. And we're going to do the same thing for each of our images in our little motif. So having that template stamped out beforehand really takes out all of the guesswork, and we already know that everything is going to line up and everything is going to fit. So all we have to do is worry about what colors we want to use. Now that all of my key elements have been stamped down, I like to go in and add the smaller images just the good old-fashioned way with an acrylic block. It's just easier and quicker than having to worry about fussing with those little images. So I'll just pick up any of the smaller images and fill them in. I already know that everything is going to fit now, and I have room for everything. So for these, for the flower centers and then these little dotted flowers, I'm using our Wild Mango ink. And again, I'm using that same ink on these little small filler flowers as well. Now for these little buds, I'm using our flamingo ink, and for the rest of those little leaves, I'm going to use our warm wool again. So once our first motif is completed, it's time to create a pattern out of this. Right now we just have 4 motifs kind of radiating in a circle. So let's fill this out. Again, we're going to go back to our template, and we're going to use that to set up where we want to fit our motif again. Now this is where the paper, being able to see through the paper, is important. And remember, as long as this fits in one of the quadrants, it's going to fit in all 4 of the quadrants without doing any overlapping. So here I'm going to fold this back just a little bit so that I'll be able to close my MISTI door. And then I'm going to place down my main flower there, and I'm going to repeat the whole process over again. I'll go ahead and ink that up, stamp it down, turn my cardstock, and repeat stamping and turning and stamping and turning. And this is why I like using a light ink as well, because when it comes to the outer edges, we no longer can tuck the corner into the corner of the MISTI. So now this time we have to line up our flower over top of our stamped flower. So having a lighter ink allows me to see the stamping beneath the paper so I can get it lined up again. And then we just repeat all the same steps as before for all of the images. And you can really start to see the pattern coming together now. You'll just keep repeating this in iterations until you've filled the paper as far as you want to. Now you could use a bigger motif and then create another smaller motif for that second iteration, and then repeat the bigger motif again for the third one. Like I said, there's so many options with this, and this is really just a jumping off point. You could make minor modifications to this and really take it off in totally different directions. While I was stamping out these patterns, I went ahead and did a couple of different versions. Sometimes I tried some different images, others I tried different color combos. I really liked this one. I used less images and I spaced them further apart. I like how this kept the pattern, it let it breathe a little bit. And then I just came in and added some of the smaller images by hand randomly to break up that pattern a little bit, make it a little less obvious that it was a repeating pattern and feel a little more tossed or organic. By having that template, we know that everything will fit. As long as your motif fits in one of the 4 quadrants, you know that it's going to fit in all of the quadrants when you stamp and turn your paper. And these just turn out so beautiful. The hardest part for me was figuring out how or if I wanted to cut them up. So for me, it was hard to decide how to turn them into cards because I really didn't want to cut them, but then I thought, I can just make another one. I've got the templates. So that made it much easier. And I wasn't as apprehensive as I would be if I only had like 1 or 2 sheets of this pattern paper. So let's take a quick look at how I finished these off into cards. I have a couple more samples as well that I didn't stamp out on camera. So the first pattern that I stamped out, I trimmed it down to 4 and 5¼ inches, mounted it to a standard card base. I used the Happy Wishes stamp also included in the Happy Wishes stamp set, and then I accented it with a few stamped and die cut flowers using the companion cuts. Now for the leftover trim, I used that to die cut some of our Love Notes dies from, and then I attached that with a few more of our die cut flowers. So here you'll see the leftover that I had trimmed off from our pattern paper there. It left me a pretty decent sized strip, and our pattern was already stamped out. So I was able to use the companion dies to trim out some of the pieces and then create some little focal points. For the background, I just used my scoreboard to score some lines and just to add a little bit of texture, and I really love the way this one turned out. Now for this one, I did a little dry embossing with our dies. This is a 5-inch square card. And then I used our Clear Cut Stackers hexagon dies to do some dry embossing in the background, and then I die cut another one, stamped our Happy Wishes, and then added some accent florals as well. Now for this one, I again used those Clear Cut Stacker hexagon dies, and I die cut one from the background paper, and then I die cut another one, and then I just stamped a few of the clusters there, and then added a little flower, and then I used the You Are So Kind from our Bold Banner Greetings stamp set. Now this one here, I did a little bit differently. I only used our method to stamp out the main flowers and the light blue leaves there. I used the MISTI to stamp that out. Everything else I added in randomly by hand. Again, this gave me all of the largest elements so that then I could squeeze some of the smaller elements in between and create a more organic or tossed floral pattern. Finished it off with a "You're the Best" sentiment stamped right there in the middle, and that's from our basic labels. Our basic labels. And then I trimmed it out with our gift card layers stitched die there, just to give a little detail along the edge. I really hope you guys enjoyed today's video and you give this technique a try. It would look great stamped in Versamark and heat embossed, and then do some ink blending over the top as well. And remember, you don't have to stick to florals. You could use any stamps in your stash. I want to thank you guys so much for joining me. Remember, if you have any questions about any of the supplies used, you can find them in the description box below. You can find the featured W+9 supplies at w+9.com, as well as at many of your favorite retailers. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!